It's an exciting day here at Digital Trends. We're shooting this video in 4K, which is great for 4K TV reviews. Not only that, though, we are comparing two of the finest TVs in 2017. On your right is the LG E7 OLED, and on your left is the Samsung Q9 QLED TV. Now, there's a little bit of confusion about what exactly QLED is and how it stacks up to OLED. We're going to answer all those questions and more in this versus video. So what is a QLED TV? Well, it's basically an LCD TV with LED backlights using quantum dots so that you get more color and higher dynamic range, therefore more contrast. It's a lot like the TVs that you're used to seeing, only Samsung has refined this down to an art so that you get a very high performance television. QLED for Samsung is also a branding effort. It helps set this TV off from the rest of their TV line, letting you know it's the best TV that Samsung makes. OLED, meanwhile, if you're not familiar, is what's called an emissive display. That means that the pixels make their own light. There is no need for an LED backlight, which means that when the pixel is off, it is off, and that's where the perfect black levels come from. I think the first thing you need to know is that the race between these two TV technologies is tighter than ever before. Samsung's QLED looks really, really good here, but is it enough to topple the OLED off the throne we've put it on? So let's start with design here, because I think anytime you spend this much on a TV, you should get a really great looking product. Samsung has really stepped up in the design department this year, and I want to start on the back of the TV because that's where we have a completely flat surface here. The profile may not be as thin as the OLED, but with this completely flat back, Samsung can get this mounted right up against the wall, almost zero gap, and that looks really good in the room. We also have a pretty narrow bezel here, and we've got this interesting sort of tubular bar stand on the left and the right that's new for this year as well. This might be one of the most critical design points. This little fishing line looking thing is actually fiber optic cable, and this is all that runs from the Samsung One Connect box up to the TV. When you paint it the same color as your wall, it is virtually invisible, and there's no reason to hide it. You don't have to punch any holes. As long as you've got power behind the TV, then this is all you have to worry about coming up from your entertainment center. Moving over to the LG, no real surprises here in the design department. It is, of course, impossibly thin until you get down to the little bump out down here. This particular model, the E7, comes with an integrated sound bar, which adds a little bit of bulk down at the bottom, but it also sounds very good. I'm not a big fan of how wobbly this TV is on its stand. However, it'll mount to the wall just fine and be perfectly secure. Taking a look at each remote, we obviously have some big differences here. On the left, you see Samsung's remote. On the right, you see LG's. LG's is a more standard style remote. It's full size. It's got lots of buttons for all kinds of functions, including some hotkeys for Netflix and Amazon, whereas Samsung really wants to drive the user experience through its on-screen interface. So we basically have a directional key here and a couple of other keys like volume control rocker and channel control rocker, but for the most part, you're working through the on-screen interface. About that on-screen interface, it used to be that LG's WebOS was my absolute favorite, but I have to say that Samsung's Tizen has really caught up, and now each one has its own individual little quirks that I find useful for each TV. I'm not willing to call a winner here in the smart TV department. They're both smart, they're both extremely fast, it's easy to navigate through all the different menus. It really just depends on your preference. But I will say that these TVs are faster than they've ever been before, loading apps and moving from screen to screen. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about picture quality. We'll start with the Samsung. Like I said before, this is probably the best TV that Samsung has ever made. The black levels are a marked improvement over the SUHD series that we saw the last 2 years. Still not perfect, but much better than before. Brightness has taken a serious uptick. We can see scenes in here that are pushing 1,000, possibly even 1,200 nits and beyond. For HDR, that's super helpful. For standard dynamic range content, it sparkles. It's just, images leap off the screen here. The black levels, while much better, are not yet perfect though. That's where we'll get to the OLED in a moment. Another non-perfection, viewing angle. You can't get away from the fact that to get true blacks from a VA-style LCD panel, you're gonna lose a lot of contrast and some color saturation when you move off angle. And it's not an extreme angle either. people in your house in normal seating positions aren't necessarily going to get the best picture quality. There is definitely a sweet spot on this TV, but man, when you get in that sweet spot, it sure looks amazing. Moving over to the OLED, of course, the OLED has perfect black levels, and we've said this before, that has everything to do with how amazing these TVs look. When you start from perfect black, everything else above that looks so much better. It cannot get as bright as the Samsung QLED can. However, by starting from perfect black, the perceptive contrast is definitely there. The color straight out of the box in the ISF bright room setting is spot on. Almost no adjustment needs to be made. The motion is also smoother on the LG OLED. There's a little less stuttering, although with the Samsung, I can put a little motion smoothing in there, avoid soap opera effect, and smooth out some of the judder I've been seeing. The color temperature straight out of the box is a little bit neutral with the LG, where it tends to be a little bit more towards the red side with the Samsung. I like the out-of-the-box color with the LG a little bit better here. Here's a really great example of how that perfect black level plays out on the screen. When you've got a bright image, you can't really tell much of a difference because the contrast between light and dark is so stark. But when you get a really dark image like this with a fixed bright spot right in the middle of the screen, you start to see the difference. Around this swimmer on the OLED TV right now, you can see it's a very distinct, clear, sharp line between the brightness and the darkness. If we move over to the Samsung, however, and this is just the deal with LED TVs, you can see some blooming around the swimmer. You don't have that distinct, sharp line between light and dark as you do on the OLED. Honestly, I don't have anything bad to say about the LG OLED's picture quality. It just looks stunning to me. And that's not just my opinion either. Pretty much everybody who's come through this room to take a look at these two amazing TVs stacked up against each other took a little time to deliberate, but eventually they settle on the LG as the better overall picture quality. Although with that said, we heard a lot of comments about how bright the Samsung was, how sharp it was, and how good looking a TV in general it is. So it's a razor thin margin, but the LG just barely pulls it out. With that said, I've got to give a lot of props to Samsung for really advancing their QLED line, giving it the best picture quality I've seen so far and a really gorgeous design.